The name's literate. Illiterate. My name is Evan.
My name is Taylor. I read a bunch of stuff this week.
I watched some movies. It is part one of our two-parter on the lead-up of the release of No Time to Die, the new James Bond film. When this comes out, the new film will be in theaters for everybody to go and see, and we are ready to give you something to go to the theater with. So that next week we'll get to that part two, having seen the new movie and discuss really the broader implications of the franchise. This week, we are happy to bring to you really the origins of the character. We are going to break into Ian Fleming and really get into the root of James Bond, the initial character, before it ever even gets to the screen. I'm super excited. Taylor,
here we go.
James Bond.
15 years or thereabouts of Daniel Craig doing Bond. He's in 5 of the movies.
God, 2006, right? Is it?
Yeah.
It's been a long time that we've lived with him. He's like our president,
right? Yeah. He's if you were, God, you would. That's the only one you would know. But 60-ish years since the first film, Dr. No, which makes it the longest continually running film series of all time.
Yeah, there's probably something there.
Only 12 novels and 2 short story collections. Of course, 8 other authors have written authorized novels, past and Young Bond and God knows what else. The thing to think about as we go into Ian Fleming and thus forth, a lot of people are like, but is he a spy? What, espionage, counterintelligence, all these terms get thrown around. This is from the Casino Royale novel, the first one. I'll read this quote for you. The business of espionage could be left to the white-collar boys. They could spy and catch the spies. He would go after the threat behind the spies, the threat that made them spy. So really, thinking about that, he's much less a spy stealing secrets of foreign powers. He's more of a counter spy operating against the agents of the unfriendly powers, which changes a lot of, then as we'll see in our second episode, the context of what people are even looking for in this.
Right.
So I hadn't heard of it being put that way, but it does make sense because spying is boring. You're listening in on phone conversation. There's some of that.
Sitting in a van.
Nothing happens for months.
Dressed as a police officer.
Yeah. Waiting in a museum. There's just much more. He's more of a international mobster. I also saw somebody wrote of him. He's just, because even if his license to kill was revoked, he would still do whatever he wanted.
Right. They kind of make that clear in Quantum of Solace.
So how does he come to be that, or was he always that? We have to talk about who made it first and who he was, which, as we often find, has a lot of impact on what the character forthwith becomes. Ian Fleming did work in the Naval Intelligence Division in the Second World War. Could not get more spy-like than that.
That's pretty darn close.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things he said to one of his compatriots shortly after the war ended was, quote, "I am going to write the spy story to end all spy stories."
Ooh.
And he did.
And so he did.
Whether that's apocryphal and he actually said that, or he said that to an interviewer after, doesn't matter. He did it.
It's a good story.
Yeah. And he's a storyteller. How he got about going on with this. His father was killed during World War I in the trenches. So he had just his mom, very wealthy family that he came from, went to a lot of different schools throughout Europe, trust fund allowances, leaving these schools because of his own, the headmaster didn't like him. They thought he was too annoying or salacious or disrespectful, etc. He actually left one because he contracted gonorrhea, and so he was extremely ill. So he's also promiscuous and that kind of thing. But living the more privileged life in terms of finances and clout, he got a job through connections with his mom petitioning various places. So he tried to work as a journalist, as a stockbroker, at a bank. All were unsuccessful. And then as far as his personal life, he was engaged to one gal, called it off within that time as well, started an affair with a married woman who was married to the 3rd Baron O'Neill. She was also having an affair with somebody else, the heir to the Daily Mail, a newspaper. So it's very much high society philandering. I don't know what
Well,
else you want to call it.
nepotism.
All that
A
kind of
little,
stuff doesn't.
yeah,
Well, just reading through it all, it didn't paint, and even his biographer didn't seem to have the highest of esteem. I'm sure he did some wonderful things, but just reading through his early life, it's also very whether I'm falsely projecting, the James Bond character, but there is some
right,
I don't know what you want to call it, but
salacious.
right, yeah. Eventually, he was recruited by the Rear Admiral John Godfrey of Naval Intelligence to be his personal assistant, again through connections and means. The biographer of his that I read, he said Fleming had no obvious qualifications for the role. So he's in there, though. Yeah. But to be praised, he did excel in it and rose up the ranks. It did work out for him. So it was something he was
got
good
some
at.
traction. He's been
here
spinning his wheels, I think is how some would say.
Maybe a little spoiled, maybe a little whatever, but he's in the Naval Intelligence.
He finally got some traction, right? He got some upward mobility maybe here. He's actually doing what he's supposed to. For
the personal assistant of one of the heads of Naval Intelligence. So then as his career progresses and he rises up in the ranks and World War II is in full swing, he does head large major operations in World War II as it relates to counterintelligence, naval intelligence. So he worked in planning an operation to monitor Spain and their possible alliance with the Axis powers, controlling the Strait of Gibraltar. Ended up not being as big as what it turned out to be, but that was something he was involved in, and it was called Operation Goldeneye.
Well, I mean, right now, if we just want to take a step back and look at just like the bare minimum things that like accumulate in a James Bond film, you can kind of see all of that in his life experience already. At an arm's distance. If you squint your eyes, everything's very out of focus. You can see it all, and all of the war training experience, the war experience itself is wildly interesting. He's going all over the world with a purpose, part of high command that certainly feeds into it. But you're going in just a few short years from just basically trotting around the city, doing God knows what.
What every 20-year-old nowadays.
Yes, exactly. Again, I'm thinking about the Green Knight. The Green Knight just comes up all the time when I think about these things. Like, what are you investing in? What direction are you really headed in? No matter what you say, what are your actions actually bearing out to where you're headed? You might not be headed the direction you think you're headed. So I'm feeling a lot of that in him. So getting up to that point, it's very interesting already to see all of those elements that later on become iconic for this franchise.
It's always good to see when somebody is living it to a degree or wishfully pretending that they were living it.
I would much rather have somebody sober up in their life and get serious and then put all of their experience into some well-formed content, some narrative, than somebody who has never actually experienced anything pontificating on what it might be like. There's a huge difference. But I need them to be sobered up a bit. But I want that experience, and I want that process of a lived emotion and context. Now, how are you going to recontextualize it and reappropriate it in a forward direction?
Right. Something else beyond just, well, that was that. Yeah. So two other big things that I mean, he did a lot of things in the war, but two other intelligence units that specifically he was in charge of or partially in charge of was the 30 Assault Unit, 30 AU, which did all sorts of intelligence gathering, covert infiltrations into enemy territory. They're trying to get documents, equipment, sometimes even people. He was in that. And then T-Force, which as things were shifting.
That's a show. Just kidding.
Well, almost in the tide of war is shifting. They're coming in as the enemy is retreating and acquiring German technology, weapons, information before it can be destroyed or subverted or just lost to history. Kind of like I saw a sort of synonymous with the Monuments Men, which then got made into a movie also, except they were recovering artwork. These guys, Ian Fleming was actually in charge of the tools of the war.
Technology, intelligence. I like that. That sounds
Yeah.
cool. That sounds like that could be a show, and
Yeah.
nobody take that from me. That's mine.
The T-Force. So I did want to
T-Force.
bring up, because you did mention that, he's got all this experience, he's behind enemy lines, he's doing all of this stuff. There is, of course, because it's secretive, no word on exactly what pieces of it he was involved in, but
Classified.
The thing that then becomes problematic is how much in the field he actually was, because in reality, most of it, he's in London, far from enemy lines. If he is heading these things, he's not the agent. So you get sort of this, oh, I'm hearing about all of these things. I'm interacting with the guys. Some of these guys are dying, et cetera, but he is not really. It's interesting, that quote that I said, the business of espionage could be left to the white-collar boys, was kind of what he was actually doing.
I wonder how much he leaned into the ambiguity of that. Well, that's classified.
Yeah, when it's like, no, you were at your desk.
A regular Linda Tripp.
Yeah.
Trying to pretend something you ain't.
Yeah. So that was interesting to me, that you get these grandiose things, but it was a lot of secondhand, perhaps. But we never know,
Hey, there's speculation.
So now, though, he is starting to write, because the war is ending. He doesn't have this job anymore.
So how old is he now?
He's 44 when he starts working on the first James Bond novel.
Oh, okay. And that's so he starts, when you say he starts to write, that is on the first novel?
Yes.
Interesting.
It is completed very quickly. So this is February of 1952 is when this is taking place. And he is at his estate in Jamaica, which he also named Goldeneye. He just loves. It was his operation, and now it's his estate.
He sounds like a cool guy.
He started writing this thing and finished it in 2 months.
Wow. Yeah, that's sick.
His fiance, because now he's engaged to someone, was pregnant, and obviously he needs money to support the family. This relationship is not of the best quality. Both of them had affairs during their marriage, continuing onward. So he's got this book, though, gives it to a publisher. Eventually, they're not impressed, but gets it published. Again, this is coming through in his story. It was a favor, because he has a brother named Peter who was in the war, was actually behind enemy lines, and now is a travel writer and is writing travel books and whatnot through the company. So this is published as a favor from his brother.
Wow.
It did tremendously well. They had to reprint it 3 times because it sold out. So
no, it sounds like an immediate success.
And so then he just continues year after year. He wrote all of his novels during the months of January and February, sequentially year to year, because he worked as a foreign manager for a newspaper in England. So he took his winter holiday in Jamaica and wrote the books there.
Yeah, that sounds. James Bond sounds like it came from this guy. He fits. This is perfect. This is beautiful.
And he's still pulling things from. So, like I said, he worked at the newspaper in London. The secretary at the paper was allegedly whom Miss Moneypenny, the secretary for James Bond, was based. Not anybody of his spy service, but his newspaper secretary.
Right.
And maybe living somewhat, I hate to say, because you can't judge the person, but maybe a vicarious, that's what some people theorize, sort of existence with these novels, if he wasn't the full spy and his brother was, is interesting.
I mean, that's what we do here, is look at what these things are then and now. So this is inalienable. We see time and time again. I mean, we see these creatives, the reverberations of their life throughout their work.
Yeah.
And this is just yet another example of that. And so, yeah, no offense meant. It's just that again, we are looking at the material and looking back at where it came from. What are the real seeds of it? Where did it begin? How did it start? And how did it grow from a point? There's a context to all that. And that's what we try to do here. So it's just another example.
Yeah.
This is really, really fascinating. The more you say, the more I'm like, yeah, this sounds like the guy that wrote James Bond.
So let's talk about then what James Bond is in the books, or at least the start of the books, before we get to part 2, and maybe what he's pulling from, what he's doing with this, if it is or isn't some vicarious thing or pieces of him.
Yeah.
Some of the pieces. The 007 I was curious about because that's a ubiquitous piece of information. Right. The Zimmerman telegram, which was decoded in World War I by British intelligence and was a very big win for them, was coded 0075.
Okay.
And it is a part of their internal system that all highly classified things have the 00 prefix.
Okay.
And so that's why Fleming said he took it for Bond, but maybe he was even alluding to that particular classified situation.
Yeah.
That it's 007. But definitely the 00 stuff is legit as far as
drop
classified.
the 5.
It's too long.
Cleaner.
075, yeah.
It's cleaner.
And then the actual personality and whatnot, we can allude, comes from him. But some of even the stuff that's going on plot-wise and some of the character traits are a compound of all the secret agents and commando types that he says he met during the war. So
yeah, I bet. And back to what we were just saying, not saying that he is James Bond. I'm saying that he is in the position to see all sorts of personalities and peoples and cultures that would eventually add up to what we know as James Bond, the franchise. He's seeing, I mean, where he is, he's seeing all sorts of peoples from an amazing point of view. And that point of view leads to material that has stuff in it like James Bond has. He's just in the position, and this is fascinating.
So there's a list of at least 15 potential people that some theorize that he is pulling from because he knew about them or wrote about them, but a few that I thought of note. His brother Peter, obviously, involved in Behind Enemy Lines operations. So he's getting word from there. Conrad O'Brien French, who was a spy who he met in the 30s.
You know, he has the aspiration to make the best spy novel of all time. I'm certain he's looking outside himself. And this is namely, I love the brother stuff. I bet that's such a big component for him. Just that really rings true.
Two other guys, Patrick Dalzell Job, who served in that 30 assault unit, who was going through stuff. And then Biffy Dunderdale was the station head of MI6 in Paris, who he had a fascination with because he was a really fancy guy, had custom cufflinks, rolled around in a Rolls Royce.
There you go.
Some of those elements being the head of MI6 in Paris. And then also a big thing was his own traits, just quirks of his. He and James Bond have the same golf handicap. They have the same fascination with the way they cook their eggs, and gambling and drinking habits are very, very similar.
And look at how banal that is compared to all the other things you just named of all these other people that had all these cool things that he's took. He's like, well, I gave him the way I like my eggs.
Yeah.
And,
and how much I drink to excess.
It's like he's being a writer about it. It's an amalgamation of a lot of different real things that add up to the character. This is really good.
One of the real things, the literal name James Bond. So and this ties to some of what he was wanting Bond to be. He said he wanted Bond to be an extremely dull, uninteresting man to whom things happened. Quote, a blunt instrument. So he didn't, and that speaks to, I read the first Casino Royale a while ago, and he is more gruff, more like the Daniel Craig stuff, which was funny. We'll talk about that. But when people gave him guff for not being like the James Bond, when in reality, in the earlier
by the
novels,
time he takes over the character, the ideal of James Bond is so refined that when Daniel Craig comes in and they really redefine the character, he's much more gruff. He's much more blue. He's not blue collar, but he's more that edge of blue collar. He is down and dirty. The movie is really rough. In a way that Bond films weren't known to be.
Yeah, he became
his casting was part of that. That first one, his casting in particular was seen as his image would be that more of a gruffer, realer, blunt object is a great way to put it. I mean, again, like he is the mobster globetrotting the world. He is more like a Tony Soprano in terms of like if he was going to go globetrot the world and then shake somebody down and shake them by the collar to know who he needs to talk to next.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
Daniel Craig's image is all part of what they were trying to do with that character, which is so funny you're pointing out, is that is much more like the very inception, the first iteration of the character, a blunt object. Things happen to, he is a blunt object where things are ramming into him. That feels much more like the Daniel Craig Casino Royale in this franchise, this iteration of this.
Exactly, that he is just a vessel for the British government,
right,
to stop global issues and
a tool. I mean, that's again, that's a great. They must have really distilled it down to that when they were really thinking about what Casino Royale was going to be. Yeah, and that's so evident to me now. I started with the ones I'd seen least, and I watched Quantum of Solace for the second time. In retrospect, that movie really moves. It has a pace, and it has really great action that I can't say the same for Spectre. And I started to think more about, well, Casino Royale is faster and there's a lot more happening. He's being beaten and going through walls, and he's really being this character battered in a way that we don't associate with James Bond
and
as
gruff
much in terms of
right.
Yeah. We think about him in a white tuxedo drinking a martini,
more of a dandy. Yeah,
right. It was interesting to see how they were really making a concerted effort through these newer films to make him a tool, a blunt object. Things are crashing on top of him. It's like a bat swinging. He is the bat. Things are crushing around him.
Well, it's almost like he's a bad spy. And, that's why I started talking about it with the spy.
Yes.
Spy
they go
definition
out of their way.
Being...
Yeah, they go out of their way to depict that actually in Quantum of Solace. It's it's not great, but that was the one thing I did really come away from that movie going like, they really go out of their way to show him failing at this, making bad decisions, people calling him out on bad decisions. That's what I was going to say. What I meant earlier when he, if he lost his license, he'd keep doing what he was going to do anyway. You said that, and I was like, yeah, that's Quantum of Solace, is that basically happens, and he just keeps going, and it is like this unstoppable force just crashing through walls. So that's so interesting to hear that's much more rooted to the origin of the character.
That is what his intention was. He said it outright, and so for the name, he said, well, I've got to have something that embodies that, and so he's also big into bird watching, Ian Fleming is, and he specifically in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, my God, there's lots of birds. And there was a book that he was reading by this famous ornithologist, and the author's name is James Bond. And he said, quote, "My God, James Bond is the dullest name I've ever heard." And that's why he's named James Bond. And then it becomes so filled with you say James Bond, and there's so many evocative images, but that's not what he wanted. He wanted him to just be...
He chose it because it was boring and banal. And now when you say it, we think of luxury.
And gadgets and globetrotting. Yeah. So bear that in mind if you're going to see the new movie. It's just fascinating.
Like, if he were to see the, like, if the Pierce Brosnan, I think of that as probably one of the old, and I haven't seen the all 21 films, so forgive me, but as how suave the character really gets, and as that becomes the iconic elements of the character that you end up paying to see the money to see, the suit, the car, the stuff. It's like, well, no, James Bond is not a cool name, guys, is what the author says. Like, no, the things that happen to him are cool. While everybody else is, no, he's cool.
Well, I can't wait. I keep saying this, but the second part, we will really get into what
I can't wait. It's really going to open up the other side of this conversation, because now we're going to get to the close of the Daniel Craig series.
Yeah.
So we'll be able to really
get to that,
compare and contrast all of the setup that we'll get through today next week.
Mm-hmm. But so adding to the personal stuff that he's taking, ornithologist name from a bird book, his friends and people that he worked with, some other story influences. Scaramanga, the villain in The Man with the Golden Gun, was named after a schoolboy who he hated, who kept fighting him in a primary school. Goldfinger was named after an architect that he really disliked this architect's work. And I think the guy,
I'm gonna immortalize your name in film.
I think there was
embolden it into the public zeitgeist.
some lawsuits from what I remember with that.
Really? Oh man.
And whatnot. Yeah.
Oh,
and then
come on.
You're like, but it's his name. It's slander.
I know, but it's like,
Yeah.
Dang.
But there's a lot of that stuff that he pulled that was just all very specific relationships and information. So as far as teasing kind of getting this adapted, in October of 1954, because he's sort of ahead of his time, I saw his biographer saying his contemporaries were more literary, wanting the literary accolades, but he was desperate for his books to be adapted. He saw the money signs also, and now Lord, the longest running thing. But so this is 1954. This is 7 months after the book Casino Royale came out in the USA. CBS bought it, the rights, and screened an hour-long version. It's on YouTube. It's black and white. They have to cut out a bunch. But this is the first time something of his is getting done. There was a big plug in terms of appeal for audiences because Kennedy, in Life magazine, an article revealed that he was a fan in 61.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I bet that was huge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, we've talked before on the show about how the pinhole of information has, exponentially increased in our lifetime. We're talking about 1961, where we're talking about the first televised presidential debate ever.
Yeah.
For the president to say in print that he's a fan of something is about as high profile an endorsement. It's like as big publicity as you could get at the time.
Exactly. And specifically with Kennedy, 61, the films haven't even come out yet. He's just talking about the books. So it's been almost a decade of the books coming out. Like I said, that 54 TV movie thing came out on Casino Royale, but almost a dozen books have come out, and the president is saying, oh, I like the books. So, but he's been trying to get these things made. So there was one complication with one of the novels, Thunderball. He was starting to write as a script. It wasn't a novel at first. And so he was writing it with other people. He got other people on board. They were interested. There was an attempt to get this Bond film made. This is in 59. I know we're jumping around in time, but it wasn't working out. The writers, they had another film that didn't do well. And so he was like, oh, this isn't going to be good. Nobody's going to want me with these writers. And so he took the screenplay and
From
wrote
the
it.
writers of a failure.
Yeah. See a James Bond thing that hasn't been made for 10 years, even though the president, So he wrote it on his own as a novel, the novel Thunderball.
Gotcha.
But huge lawsuit. The guy, one of the writers, McClory, because it's like, we wrote that as a screenplay and then you just wrote it as a novel because the screenplay wasn't working out. So this becomes huge. This huge lawsuit, and McClory gets the literary and film rights for the screenplay, and Fleming gets the novel rights. But the novels for Thunderball have to say based on the screen treatment by and the other guys who wrote the screenplay, which comes into play when we'll talk about the production of the films. But that was a downward slope.
God.
Dr. No was the first film that gets made in 62. So the year after, because they couldn't make Thunderball. So they pick a different book of his as it's building in publicity. But this becomes the end of Ian Fleming because he died. He was 56 years old. He died 2 years after Dr. No, the movie, came out.
Oh, wow.
Unsurprisingly, he was a heavy smoker and drinker and died of heart disease after having a heart attack a few years before. And so he only ever saw that one, saw the second one, and visited the set of Goldfinger, the third film, but did not actually see it.
He ought to know better than taking all their work and putting it into a novel with just his name on it. It's like, you really thought you could yes, I know it's your character, but you really thought you could just take, That's all I got. That's the only.
Well, it becomes it becomes a nightmare. It becomes a nightmare when we get to the production of the films and who owns what and all this other foolishness. But
it's amazing that it actually, because it could have saw the demise of it before it ever got off the ground. They're really, he in particular, Ian Fleming, is lucky that it continued at all.
Yeah,
that could have. What if we talked about it last week? That could James Bond could have very well never have made it to the screen.
And the fact that here's this guy, like I said, he had almost a dozen novels. 2 of them were published posthumously. He only sees the first 2 movies out.
Yeah,
and then he dies. What becomes of it, which is everything that we know it now, because the first one was not critically revered. Yeah.
Right. Saying all this is making it more and more incredible that this is still alive, the largest running cinematic franchise ever. That for it to have had this critical false start, and then the actual originator die while it's still in its infancy on the screen, 2 films into a 21 film run,
and there's 12 books still.
It's incredible that this series maintains its posture at all.
And so the mystery of how it becomes this everlasting property, what could they do to this thing? We will find out next week.
I'll have seen the film. Hopefully you guys will have seen the film, and we can take what we've learned now about the genesis of Bond and apply that to No Time to Die being the rounding out of this iteration of a character. We've never really straddled a release before, and nonetheless have we straddled the end, the known end of such a long-running series. Daniel Craig has been James Bond since 2006, so we know that this is the last film with him. So this is going to be a really fun thing for all of us to do together. It's going to be an awesome conversation to pick up next week.
What was and is and will be.
Yeah.
We will cover it all.
So I hope everybody enjoyed today. Thank you for sticking with us. I really appreciate all of the support. Give us a like. Give us some 5-star reviews. Give us a 3-star. Give us whatever stars you
tell
think
a friend.
We deserve. Recommend it. If we've done an episode on somebody's favorite thing, or something that you've always wanted to introduce somebody to, something we've never known quite how, maybe our episode on that thing is the way. Maybe it's the bridge. I don't know. We would love some support. Recommend us. Thumbs us up. And we will catch you next week for part 2 of No Time to Die, James Bond. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.